So I have things to discuss, things to talk about. What video am I doing now? I have like 3 videos that I need to do tonight. Hey everybody, welcome to my April wrap-up. I read some books in April and now I'm going to discuss them. That's how wrap-ups work. I need to find my right page. Okay, so we're going to go back to like the statistics sandwich format that I did last month. I read 11 books this month, which is actually better than I thought I was going to do. And I read a lot of like big fantasy books, so I'll take it. All of the books that I read this month, I only physically read 2 of them. But I am a good chunk of the way through Lord of Chaos, which I did not finish, even though I was supposed to finish it in April. So maybe, hopefully, I'll get 2 of the Wheel of Time books knocked out in May. I am about halfway through Lord of Chaos. But I did finish 2 like physical reading, and then I listened to 9 audiobooks. I had 8 fantasy books. We're not surprised. 1 nonfiction book, 1 gothic literature. It's the classic that I read this month. And then I read The Alchemist. Not really sure what genre that goes into. It could also be fantasy. Like, I've seen some people label it fantasy, but I'm not sure if I would label it fantasy. So it's just in a genre all its own. The Alchemist. I read 1 Alchemist book. And I think the only other statistic I have to share during this portion is that 9 of the books that I read were adult books, and then I read a YA, and I read a middle grade. As far as I can tell by the breakdowns, I went ahead and counted both Sabriel and Down Among the Sticks and Bones as adult, even though I kind of feel like they could spin the YA direction. So we'll go ahead and get the non-fantasy out of the way real quick. I read The Good Neighbor by Maxwell King. This is the biography on Fred Rogers, and it was really a delightful experience. So much nostalgia. I listened to the audiobook, and it's read by LeVar Burton, and it's just heartwarming and wonderful, and I loved it. It did kind of break my heart at times, because honestly, I have Fred Rogers on such a pillar that anytime that there was something like what I said is that anytime there was like a swear word, I was just like, oh no, LeVar Burton just said a swear word. My little 4-year-old heart. But then my 4-year-old heart like breaks tenfold when I think about the fact that that was actually Fred Rogers saying that swear word. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I like about it. I like the in-depth, behind-the-scenes stuff that it did with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and really talked about like all of the decision-making and all the process about it. And then the life stuff and the family stuff. It's really all around like felt like a really well put together and a really nice respectful and understanding approach to that man who is just such an icon and a product of his time. Like, Fred Rogers couldn't really exist today. It just doesn't work to the same caliber as it did back then. Like, you couldn't really do Fred Rogers' Neighborhood in the way that it was done. So it's good. I really recommend that one. I also read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. I wasn't crazy about this one, and I thought I hit the gold mine with Gothic literature, and I would never find a Gothic literature piece that I wasn't crazy about. But I think the problem with this one is, if you know the story, if you know Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and you know, like, the whole relationship there, then a lot of that book isn't really that suspenseful, because you already kind of know what's going on, so what's the point, basically? I won't lie, I kind of very passively absorbed this one. I had it on audiobook, I was working, I was just kind of letting it play and listening to it, so it probably deserves a reread. Like, I probably need to revisit it when I'm a little bit more focused in on it. But overall, nothing really stood out to me as, like, quality. It was fine. Like, I can see why it's a classic, and I could definitely see, like, if you don't, like, imagine reading it without knowing what's going on, and you're just like, whoa, that's awesome. But it's not really the same story when you know what's going on. And The Alchemist I read in much a similar way. Like, I very passively absorbed that one through audiobook while I was working, and I don't know how I feel about it. There's not enough there to make me super excited to, like, deep dig into it, but there's enough in there that I feel like maybe I should. Basically what I'm trying to say is that I think that there's enough that if I took the time to dig a little further, I might get something out of it, but I'm not sure if that would be a positive experience for me. I'm not sure if what I would get out of it would be something that I enjoyed. I'm kind of like have a casual respect for it right now. Like I like it well enough with the way that I experience the story, but I feel like if I like scratched beneath the surface more than I already have, I wouldn't be crazy about it. And it is a hard one for me to try to like explain what it's about because I so passively absorbed it, so I'm afraid if I like say certain things about it, it would be like spoilers. Basically, a boy has a dream, and he decides that it's a prophecy, and he goes on this quest, and a lot of crap happens during that quest. But it's one of those where it's an exploration of truth and finding the real truth and the real value of life, and it's one of those. Okay, so now all I have left to talk about is fantasy. This is great. Am I recording? I am still recording. I was really nervous for a second. I'm just going to go down the list of how I wrote them because that makes sense. Truth Witch by Susan Dennard. This is a YA fantasy in which there are witches, in which there are witches. That is a fabulous sentence. I love that sentence. There are like all kinds of different witches, and they all have different powers and abilities, and they don't really make a huge amount of sense. Also, the world building wasn't super great in this. Like, at its core, it's about two best friends who are both witches, and they're just trying to build a life for themselves, and then they're constantly, like, being pushed to the edge, like they get, pursued, people are after them, they keep having to be on the run, they can't ever seem to just settle down and, like, just be normal, you know, everyday witches with superpowers. I think this book definitely suffered a whole lot from just, like, telling you and never really showing you. I don't think the main relationship between the two girls was developed very well. There was a whole lot of instances where characters were introduced and you were just basically force-fed what their relationship is with to the other characters, and none of it was really, like, developed or you know, done in a way that was satisfying, like, really felt earned. Like I said before, the world building was not great. The magic system wasn't really fleshed out to my very high standards of wanting like a really interesting magic system. It had the seeds, but it wasn't really like developed in a way that I was interested in. The plot was kind of lackluster. There was just a lot of stuff that it wasn't developed enough for me. There was some good seeds in there, but they never really took root. Now, on the very opposite of that spectrum, we have The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and this is an incredibly well-developed book with awesome story arcs for multiple characters, really amazing magic system, world building off the charts. This is like high caliber fantasy, and now I understand why Brandon Sanderson is as praised as he is, because this is well thought out fantasy. But at the same time, there are some issues that I have with this book. I don't think it's a perfect book. There's a lot of things that happen in the second half of the book that I was not a fan of. I think that they didn't really make sense when compared to what was set up in the first half of the book. There's a lot of characters that ended up in places that didn't seem earned, and also, like, he did such an amazing job establishing Vin, who is kind of like your main character for most of the book, and then she does something in the second half of the book that seems out of character. And on one side, I'm just like, that's really annoying. That's so out of character for her. I can't believe he did something like that. But on the other side, I'm just like, how on earth did he establish her character so well in the first half of the book that in the second half, I'm just like, that's out of character for her. Why are you breaking her character? So it's like, as annoying as that moment is, it's also amazing to me that he was able to achieve that. So The Final Empire is the first in the Mistborn saga, and it follows Vin and Kelsier as they're kind of trying to form this party to overthrow the government that exists in this world. This world is ash covered. There's ash coming from the sky. It's just, everything's dead. There's no, like, you know, beautiful, like, foliage or anything like that anymore. It's just a dead world, and there's mists that come out at night, and yeah, there's the Mistlings, I think is what they called, who have some aspect of this allomancy magical power that they have, where they consume metals and burn them and are able to achieve certain feats because of the metals that they specialize in. But then there are also the Mistborns who can control all the metals, so that's fun. And like, I really enjoyed this world. I really enjoyed the magic system. There were some character moments I wasn't crazy about. That's the only, like, some character moments I had some problems with. But the world and the magic system and the actual, like, story arc and everything like that, the plot was really good. But there's some moments with the characters that I felt either one, weren't earned, or two, went against that character. And those are really spoilery, and I cannot get into those in this video. I also listened to the audiobook for His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. This is a book that kind of made me embarrassed, because I didn't really fully understand that it was an alternate history that kind of follows the Napoleonic Wars. And it took me an embarrassingly long amount of time to realize that. Like, I was way too far in the book before I was like, oh, that's what this is. I went into it pretty blind. I knew nothing about it other than it was a long-running fantasy series with Naomi Novik that featured dragons. So I was all in. I hadn't read any Naomi Novik books up until this point, but for some reason I was so committed to reading this one first. And I liked it. It's pretty slow paced. There's a lot of, like, setting up the initial relationship, because the idea is you have your main character, who cannot remember his name at all. For some reason, Lee is coming into my head. Lawrence. Maybe it's Lawrence. I don't remember. But he is with the Navy and ends up discovering a dragon egg and bonds with the dragon when it is born. And so has to become part of the Air Force, essentially, because there is an Air Force in this war that is just dragon riders. It's great. It's quality alternative history for me. Like, just take any major war and add dragons, and I'm just like, yes, that is a book I want to read. Got a delivery. I didn't get a delivery. My roommate got a delivery. I'm not buying stuff this year. I'm being good. Okay, Game of Stars. This is by Sayantani Dasgupta. It is the second book in the Kiranmala. I think that's something to do with the series. When I started this channel, I thought, man, I'm gonna be so well, like, researched and know all of my crap whenever I sit down to film a video. And now I'm just like, I'll just film a video even though I don't have a clue what I'm doing. This is a middle grade fantasy series that pulls a lot from West Bengal folktales and mythology and history, and it's really interesting. I don't really care for the execution. It's a little too I don't want to say childish is the right word, because I like childish books, but it's like, it seems kind of like it's trying too hard to be cool. So I think the thing that always stands out to me is that the slang that the main character uses is so, like, weirdly out of touch. Like, it really feels like 90s slang. And it's kind of awkward at times reading through, and you're just like, nobody talks like this. Nobody actually says these words. This isn't something, especially not like a 12-year-old in today's world. That's not the way that they talk. There's a lot of weird things, decisions, choices that were made in this book especially, but throughout all, where they're very young, yet there's, like, shipping that happens, which I know happens, but I feel like the author also kind of encourages it to happen, and that's always awkward to me. Like, I don't like reading stories about 12-year-olds who are pursuing relationships. It's not something I enjoy, unless, of course, it's an epic fantasy, and it's, like, really awful that they're in this situation, because that happened. But this is, like, set in modern times, and it's actually targeted at 12-year-olds for reading purposes, so there's certain issues that I have with that. But I think the thing that keeps bringing me back to these books is the way that she pulls from so many elements, and at the end of every book, the author has, like, this is where this came from, this is where this came from, and it fully breaks down everything that was in the book, and like what inspired her to write about that, and the research that went into it, and where you can learn more about that particular like folktale or that moment in history. And that is always so fascinating to me, and I love that she does that and spends time doing that, because I think that always gets me excited. It's funny because I get to the end of the book, I'm just like, man, that was okay. But then I read that last section and she's just so excited and nerdy, and she just wants to pull from all of these different parts of her culture, and it's just awesome. Like that, those sections always make me super happy that I read through that book, and then I get to learn about all of this stuff that those books pull from. It's really neat, even though I'm not crazy about those books. I also listened to the audiobook for The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski. That's sort of close to his name, I think. This is the first in the Witcher book series, what obviously the video games are based off of, and the forthcoming TV series are also going to be based off of. And so I wanted to get into this series. I've played the first video game. I have some understanding of what's going on in the video game world, but I know that it's very different than what was in the books, and you can already kind of see that, but this is just a collection of short stories, and it's where you're supposed to start. There's not a huge amount of like narrative flow. There's some really interesting moments and some scenes that you can pick out, but it's just a big collection of short stories that follow Geralt and his Witcher ways, which I guess if you don't know, the Witcher, or Witchers in general, are just kind of almost like mercenary type figures that specifically fight monsters and different kind of magical creatures. And so this is just kind of a collection of his different quests and missions and specific encounters. And there's some really solid stories in there. I'm really excited when we get into more of like the novel length narratives and get time to develop these characters a little bit more than you get in like just a one-shot short story, quick snap of just a moment in time. I want a long continuing narrative, and I'm excited when we get to those books. I have one more short story collection to get through, and then we'll get into the actual books. Oh, you know what? I lied. I actually physically read Sabriel by Garth Nix. I started it on audiobook, and then I read it physically, and I finished it this month. So all of those statistics that I had at the beginning are just trash. Just ignore everything that I ever tell you. Sabriel is a book that I didn't care for, even though I liked the concept, and I liked the world, and I liked a lot of stuff going into it. The execution and the writing style really put me off. The writing style is definitely my biggest problem with this book. It took a long time to like focus in on things that I did not care about. It did a lot of scene setting. It did a lot of just detail-oriented descriptions. But it never really focused in on like the emotional impact of things, definitely not as much as I would have liked it to, and it bothered me a lot throughout this. So Sabriel is a book about a girl named Sabriel, whose father is the Abhorsen, and he goes missing, and she goes out to try to find him. The Abhorsen is kind of like a necromancer in reverse. He specifically works to try to force things through these various gates that exist beyond death, to keep them from coming back. So it's really like awesome the way that the magic system works, the world's built. I love the idea of this world beyond where there's all of these different gates, and I like a lot of the things that go into the foundation of this piece. But like I said, the actual execution, the story that is told using all of those pieces wasn't that interesting to me. It didn't focus on the parts that I wanted it to focus on, and ultimately the ending left me kind of unsatisfied. I'm really wanting to try to read a little bit of the second book because I like so much about what went into this world. I would like to read at least like 100 pages of the second book and just see where I land with it, especially with the characters. I don't really care about any of the characters, and I think that's the biggest roadblock that I have. As much as I'm interested in how this world's going to continue to develop, I don't think it's going to be enough to carry me through all of the stuff that I don't care about in this series. Hey guys! I finished The Once and Future King this month. The Once and Future King has been a huge book on my list for several months now. It's been one that I've wanted to get to for a while, even before I started like my quest to read all the Arthurian legend. And when I decided to really go ham on Arthurian legend, I was just like, okay, I've got to read The Once and Future King. And boy, is that a dense book. It is not where I would recommend you start if you want to pursue Arthurian legend. For one thing, it kind of like cherry picks a lot. Which is fine. Like, it really focuses in on what it wants to focus in on, and then it spends a long time in those areas. And I like what it focuses in on, but at the same time, it doesn't really give you a good, like, big picture of what's going on in a lot of respects. It really kind of just, like, basically the first half of the book, maybe not even the first half, like, the first section, the Sword in the Stone section. That's the Arthur section. And there's kind of like a mismatch section. That's the second book. And then it's just all Lancelot. Everything's Lancelot from there on out, which I'm fine with. I love Lancelot. Great character. I really love the way he's portrayed in this book. It's really interesting to read about. But at the same time, I'm just like, well, isn't this about King Arthur? Like, isn't he, like, still, you know, a character that maybe we should know some stuff about? But then the final chapter is like the most beautifully written, gorgeous thing. And it's entirely from Arthur's perspective. And it's just beautiful. So basically what I'm trying to say is this book is weird. It's not really like a flowing narrative type of book. It jumps around a lot. There's a lot of different perspectives and almost like just different stories being told at the same time that don't really intersect or intersect very minimally. Some parts of it are almost written like an essay. Some parts of it are written very much like, you know, a general novel would be written. And it breaks the fourth wall like crazy. It doesn't really start that way. At least I don't remember it breaking the fourth wall too much at the beginning. It did. Like, it did in the respect that Merlin kind of broke the fourth wall, because Merlin's just such a bizarre beast of a character, and he was allowed to do that because the way he exists. But beyond that, then it was just straight up T.H. White. Just T.H. White would just break the fourth wall. Once you didn't have the Merlin character to do it for you, he was just like, screw it, I'm gonna break the fourth wall anyway, and just not worry about it. So it's really like a bizarre piece to get through, but I love it. It's great. And then finally, I read Down Among the Sticks and Bones, and I actually read this one. I finished Sabriel, finished Once and Future King, and I read all of Down Among the Sticks and Bones. So that's 3 books that I actually took time to sit down and read. I am proud of myself because April got away from me real fast. Down Among the Sticks and Bones is the second in the Wayward Children series by Sean and McGuire. It's actually a prequel, which I didn't realize. I thought the other one was the prequel. Maybe the other one's also a prequel too. There's like 4 of these out now, I think. Maybe the 5th one was just announced. They're all short novellas that follow around this concept of children who go to visit like the other world, magical lands kind of places, Narnia, Wonderland, those kind of things. They're all original worlds in these stories. This one follows 2 characters from the first book. I really probably would have liked this one even more had I not read the first book. Like, I feel like you could read Down Among the Sticks and Stones first, and then go and read the first book. And I almost feel like that would be a better reading order. And I'm usually like such a stickler about publication order. Like, I always want to read something in publication order. But I think in this case, I would say read Down Among the Sticks and Bones first, and then read Every Heart a Doorway. And I think that is a better reading order. I think I'm going to stick with that. But there was definitely like things that happened in this book that were basically spoiled for me because I knew what happens in Every Heart a Doorway. So it was kind of unfortunate that I had that information going into this book. I think I would have liked this book even more if those twists were actually twists for me, but they weren't. They were just like, okay, well, that's when that thing happens. But yeah, That one's really good. I liked it way more than Every Heart a Dory, and I enjoyed Every Heart a Dory. I thought it was an enjoyable enough novella, but this one I really, really liked. And it's a really creepy, dark world. And I liked the gothic literature aspects of it. There you go. Bringing it back to gothic literature. I love it. Okay, so, like, collection update-wise, of these 11 books that I read, I owned 6 of them, and I borrowed 5 of them. So, I got 6 books knocked off of my, like, physical TBR. I'll take it. It's not the best, but there were several cases where I had to read a book that is part of a series that is before a book I own, because I bought books out of order, because that's what you do when you buy used books. So, like, I want to say it's like the Temeraire series, that's the Naomi Novik series, and the Witcher series, both of those I owned books for, but I didn't own the first book, so I had to get those from the library. So I am still working towards that goal of reading through my physical collection and trying to whittle that down. I am probably going to get rid of Truthwitch, probably going to get rid of Sabriel, unless I just fall in love with the second book, but I'm not expecting that, so I'll probably get rid of Sabriel, and I'll probably get rid of The Alchemist. The more I think about it, the more I just don't really care enough to, like, revisit it. So I'll get rid of those 3, which is good, because shelf space is a commodity that I don't have enough of. Of the ones that I read that I didn't own, I would like to add The Last Wish to my collection, and The Once and Future King is definitely going to have to be added to my collection. That is a must. But yeah, that's it. So that wasn't too bad. I actually, like, got rid of 1 book more than I will potentially add in the future. So maybe at one point I'll have a collection that doesn't overwhelm me and cause me to be completely anxiety-ridden. But I hope not. I hope I will always have way more books than I have time, because that is as much anxiety as it gives me. It's also the dream, right? It's also the dream. So anyway, that is my April wrap-up. I have a whole nother video that I gotta film after this, and I need to keep this momentum going. So thank you so much for watching, and you'll see me in the next video.